Hello, everybody, and welcome to BH Live, where we interview some of the most amazing creatives from around the world every week on a Sunday at 6 p.m. on my Instagram Live. So if you're listening on a podcast, it's at Brendon_Hansford. So make sure you come down and check us out every Sunday from 6 o'clock. So this week, I've got the pleasure of interviewing Peter Neill. His account is also known as Shoot the Sound. Peter Neill is a very good friend of mine. He's been doing some photos for me lately. So if you go and look at my profile, go and look at some of his incredible work. And to be honest, he is an absolute legend. I love this guy to pieces. So Peter is a music industry photographer and Sony ambassador who specializes in working with bands in all settings from the back of the tour bus, the studio to the stage. Clients include Queen, Justin Timberlake, The Script, U2, Rick Astley, Elbow, will.i.am, and many, many more. Trust me, there's so many more. Peter specializes in working in situations that are very demanding, both technically and creatively, and as such, he shoots on an A7S2 and an A7R3. He is from Ireland, but is based in London with his wife and his two lovely children. You can see his work at shootthesound.com and under the username Shoot the Sound on all online services. And before we bring him on, I just need to mention we now have a new sponsor for this, which is dnacers.com. So if you go onto Instagram and type in dnacers_official, you can see those guys, they are officially sponsoring this show going forward. So I am going to bring on Mr. Peter Neill himself, and hopefully, by the magic of technology, he should appear any second now. Fingers crossed. I'm just going to keep talking until he does. Hello, Mr. Peter Neill.
How you doing?
I'm
Thanks for having me
very
on, dude.
No, thank you so much for coming on. How are you how was your day?
It was good actually. We did a massive clean out in the house this morning, and then what the kids reluctantly, the kids weren't that keen on going for a walk, but we dragged them out and turned into like a 2 hour trek around the neighborhood. So yeah, it's good.
Oh
I've got
wow.
the burning sunshine on my back now through the window, which is great. So
Amazing. Well, I've missed the sunshine on my balcony now. It's already gone and
yeah.
missed. I know you were building a super machine. How's the new editing machine going?
Yeah, really well. Yeah, basically, my background long before I did photography was IT, and so every couple of years, kind of build a new machine for doing all my photo and video editing on. So I bought all the components over the last few weeks on Amazon and various different places, and
Yep.
then put it together a couple of days ago, and went through all its testing. And the first job I edited was your photos, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was baptized with Brendon. So it's gone very well.
Amazing. So I asked this question to everybody when we first start. Basically, tell
Hmm.
us your life story up till now in 5 minutes. Go.
Oh my God. Okay. Born in Skibbereen in the West Cork, we're southwest of Ireland. Um, Almost all my family are clergy. You can't throw a stone in my family without hitting one. Um, and Yeah, I kind of grew up mostly in the west of Ireland, County Mayo, and I kind of got very into during that time. I ended up in IT initially after school,
Mm.
and with photography as a hobby that had been kind of all ever present during my childhood at different stages, with big gaps though. And then kind of got married in 2005, two kids, Evie and Theo, and my wife Ailey. She's from Scotland, though born in Michigan in America. So a bit of a long story there. Won't fit in 5 minutes. Um, but during the recession, kind of in 2008, 2009, I kind of got out of IT and into photography as a job. Worked in weddings and discovered that I was not built for working in weddings because the stress was just like destroying me. Props to any wedding photographers who are on here watching this because yeah, I'm not built for that. Decided if I was going to stay in photography, I needed to try and find something I love doing.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I'll look and see if there's any way to get into music. And a mate of mine drew my attention to an ad in a newspaper for a short-term web developer job in a graphic design company that was owned by U2.
Mm.
And I thought this might be a bizarre route. So I applied for this 2-week web development contract, got the contract, met this guy there called Steve Averill, who's the guy who named U2 and
Okay.
designed their album covers. And I showed him a couple of pictures where I'd snuck a camera into a music festival,
Yeah.
and that was literally all I had. That one couple, like 3 photos to show him, and he decided to take a chance, called up Bono, and organized for me to go over to Don Valley Stadium in 2009 shot that gig there, first three songs from the
Yep.
pit. And I was super lucky that some of the material from that show ended up in the official book of the tour. The band picked some of that for the tour.
Nice.
And then I did nothing for a year because shit was hitting the fan in Ireland economically. So I had like
Yep.
other stuff to deal with. And about a year later, I went back. They invited me to shoot them in Paris in 2010, and ended up from that getting very lucky to get my first magazine cover, which is a Billboard
Nice.
magazine cover with a picture of Bono with his arms out wide. And
Of course you shot Bono.
yeah, and that was kind of, so that was kind of that was like a bizarre, but so I kind of came back from that gig, still not having really got any paid work out of photography,
Okay.
other than weddings, and decided what I would do then is I would approach local vendors or like promoters in Ireland and try and shoot their shows for like social media for next to nothing,
Mm.
basically for petrol money,
Yep.
and did that for a couple of years whilst trying to, pick up other IT work to keep the ship afloat, essentially. And eventually picked up my first client, which were the Script, who I still work loads with, and then
Wow.
moved to the UK in 2012, and they started introducing me to other people like, Will I Am and Gary Barlow, and that led on to, relationships with record labels and led on to people like Justin Timberlake. And so it was just completely bizarre way
Yeah.
to get into it. But yeah, that's a really shortened version. So I probably missed out whole decades and whole people, but
But you've got to
there
fit it
you
into
go.
5 minutes, right? So
Yeah,
it's always
yeah,
hard to do. I don't think I could
yeah.
tell my life in 5 minutes. There's too many ups and downs like this.
Absolutely. That's the same with us all.
So if you had to define the one moment that you've decided choreography, that's me, photography was for you, what would it be? Like I have a sort of story of when I wanted to get into dance. I walked past Pineapple. I was studying
Yeah,
fashion at the time, so fashion design. I was a sketcher and a drawer. And I looked in the window and I saw these dancers and I was just like hooked and mesmerized by it and had to try it. And I knew that was the moment that I wanted to
yeah.
do this. Did you have that kind of defining moment where you were like,
Yeah,
photography is the one?
I had a bizarre in 2007, Alien and myself, we went to San Francisco on holiday for 2 weeks. And this is before I'd started shooting weddings. I was still in IT at this point.
Yeah.
This is pre-big financial crash. And I brought with me a Canon 350D SLR, which
Ooh.
is my first digital SLR. And I had been out of cameras for a few years at that point because I'd had a number of gaps. Um, but I had a crappy lens that came with it, 18 to 55 mil lens. But while I
Good
was over
lens.
there, yeah, the first day that I was over there, I went to the shop and I bought an 85 mil 1.8 prime
Ooh.
lens,
Yep.
which is a long focal length on a camera with what's called a crop sensor. Basically
Yep.
means effectively it made in effect the lens even more zoomed in, so you could see.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So I kept this lens on the holiday for the whole 2 weeks, and because of that, every kind of picture where I was trying to get my wife in frame with such a landmark, I was having to contort into these bizarre positions to get these pictures. And I still have these pictures, which are just like people were looking at me like, is he having some kind of fit or is he taking a picture? But but I came home from that trip with a sense of composition that I never had, and I kind of developed a love for photography from that trip because I had to work for all these shots during that trip. So it wasn't one moment, but it was one trip. It was that 2 weeks
Yep.
that made me realize I want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
And then I went into weddings and went, what the hell? And then eventually ended up in music. So there you go.
Ah, incredible. That's such a great story. So
Yeah.
looking at your career, you've worked with some incredible people and you've had a career that most people would die for. So I'm going to ask you, what's been your favorite job up till now and why?
Oh man, that is favorite individual job
Yeah.
as like a specific assignment is probably with the Script traveling around the States in 2014. Kind of on a tour bus, effectively sleeping in a wheel arch in this little coffin, which it is like that. You're like these little coffins.
Yeah.
But traveling around the west coast of the States, getting all this kind of material behind the scenes on a bus,
Yeah.
late at night, early in the morning, on the stage, behind the stage, like no filter.
Wow.
And I guess developing a trust with a client to that level for the first time where they
I was
let
going to
you
say,
in.
did you get to know them really well as a band?
Yeah, well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I classify them all as like really close friends now, and that doesn't happen
Amazing.
with every client, and some clients you could spend ages with and still never get into that zone. But yeah, I got to know them really, really well. And with that does come trust, and with trust comes better pictures because
Yeah.
they know what to not take photographs or what pictures to delete, or what
Yeah.
it's like, deleting is every bit as important as taking a
Yes, I can
picture.
imagine. I bet you got some incredible photos that you had to delete.
Yeah, absolutely. And some that, give you kind of tears inside pressing the delete button,
Oh, I
Yeah, but
know.
but has to be happening if you want to have a job.
Brilliant. So how long did that go on for? How long were you on tour with them?
That was only my first, that's like kind of my first overseas trip. So
Hmm.
that was only like 2.5 weeks. But
Okay.
that I think that was kind of the single most, I guess, impactful trip.
Yeah.
I don't tend, because I've got two kids, I tend to try and avoid doing massive long
Yeah.
trips, and quite frankly it's not really necessary,
No.
because with if you compare my job, and also, well, quite frankly, record labels won't pay what they used to pay, but
Yeah.
um, with digital there's less ambiguity about whether what you've got or
Right.
not,
Yeah.
and so the taking to pictures to reviewing it, that whole cycle is quicker.
Yeah.
So it's much, as long as you remain creative, it's much more easy to get complete coverage of a tour that's
Okay.
suitable for, say, a tour program in a smaller amount of time than it was back when everything had to be sent off to be developed.
Yes. So,
So it's a different beast.
all right. So on the flip side, what is, and don't mention names, what's the
Okay, no problem.
worst job you've ever done and why? Like the one that was
Oh,
just painful and gives you nightmares when you
yeah.
think about it.
The worst job I ever did was with an artist, and I shan't name the
No,
artist.
don't name.
It was at a festival about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and they were a meet and greet had been organized where a fan had won a meet and greet with this particular artist,
Right.
and because I was working for the artist, I was asked obviously to
Okay.
photograph the meet and greet, and we were waiting outside this kind of canteen where the fan was waiting, and hearing this particular individual's attitude towards their fans was horrendous.
Ooh.
Now, for anyone watching, this is not any of my regular clients. This is a one-off client. For anyone who knows my work well, it's one-off client that most of you don't even know I shot, because I was so disappointed in this person. I never ever published a single picture from
No.
working with them because I was
So
so
no one
disappointed in
knows. So
them.
don't
No
stop
one knows who it
guessing. Stop
was. Yeah,
guessing.
stop
No
it.
one guess.
But yeah, but and it kind of, just the way that they treated them, and like barely looked at them and refused to sign anything more than the one little thing. And it
Oh
just,
wow.
yeah, I mean, that's a standout bad experience I've had. And, 99.9% of
Yeah.
experiences have been good, to be honest with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And how did he or she treat you as a
Um,
photographer? Were they inviting for you? Were they happy for you to be there, or was it kind of like, oh,
oh,
get on with it?
it was very kind of like I was just a drone, and they spoke everything through their kind of rep who was with them, who
Yeah.
kind of asked for things on their behalf and wiped their bottom, and so yeah, so it was not a good experience, but that's a rare thing that, and there's very, very few artists I find who do
Yeah.
meet and greets who don't actually like their fans. So
That's
yeah,
terrible, isn't
thankfully it's
it?
a rare thing.
Wicked.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk a bit more about photography because that's where your
Cool.
your specialty is, and you work predominantly with stadium live concert photography, with
Yeah.
thousands of people watching the band at the
So that's
time. And
really,
obviously,
yeah, so that's really booming right now.
yeah, it's really, really. I
Yeah.
was gonna say
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll get to the Corona question in the end,
Yeah.
but yeah, obviously, right now it's a struggle, obviously. But how do you deal with the pressure of that environment? Because you don't have time to set up a shot, and you know that I've dabbled in photography and I've also
Yeah.
dabbled with that. So I haven't done much stuff like that in live photography other than like a few events. But how do you deal with thousands of people watching? They obviously can't stop and be like pose for the camera. How do you go
Yeah.
about getting the best shot? How do you go about making sure you've got the right settings at the right time, the right shutter speed, everything? Like, how do you deal with
Yeah.
that pressure? Like, what's
Yeah.
your coping
Well,
mechanism?
the first thing, weirdly, and I think if you're in what you're meant to do, I think what one person's pressure is another person's buzz. So
Yeah,
in weddings, I felt the pressure, and I'm sure
yeah,
there are people out there who feel a buzz from it.
yeah,
With music, I don't feel pressure, I feel buzz.
yeah.
So that's the first thing I'd say. It doesn't there's no negative feeling with that. Yeah,
Okay.
I got they're butterflies, but they're butterflies you get like about being excited about something, not
Yeah.
dreading something, making you run to the bathroom. You
Yeah,
know what I
yeah,
mean.
yeah.
But because of that, that puts a whole different tilt on it. As regards planning it, I mean, a lot of that's contextual. I mean, there are big differences as regards if it's a tour that you're working on for several nights, then you've got opportunities to try and focus on different areas and different nights.
Yeah,
But if it's a one-off with an artist, you really have to do your homework.
yeah.
So obviously, knowing the music is a great thing. As a great performer, you can work out what some of their performances will,
Ah.
depending on what the peaks of the
Yeah, I
music are.
suppose
You
the
know, good,
accents of the
yeah,
music will define
yeah,
whether they're going to hit a moment or
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. So a good performer, that gives you kind of a hint. But there are other hacks as well. So if it's an artist I don't know well, and maybe they've already been on tour, but I'm only shooting with them one night,
yeah,
I'll go onto stuff like YouTube or TikTok or whatever, Instagram, and look for stuff where fans have filmed the first two or three songs, and
yeah,
then that gives you a massive leg up
yeah,
because if you're in the pit with 10 other photographers and maybe I don't know the bass player over to the left of the stage comes
yeah,
out to the edge and all the photographers run over to that bass player
yeah.
to get pictures, if you've done your homework, you might be the one person who doesn't run over there, and actually be
Right.
the person who waits because you know the lead singer is going to go and stand on this speaker over here or whatever the
Yeah,
case may be. So that research allows you to get unique stuff that other people haven't gotten because they haven't put the research in.
yeah,
So that's one of the things. If again, there's other levels of prep. If you're working for an artist, I love going to chat to the person who's designed the lighting. So
yeah.
if he or she has particular favorite moments in the show,
Oh, clever.
find out
Yeah,
from
very
their
clever.
perspective. Yeah, and often those moments that the lighting person who's designed that has designed that with the band as well, and
Yeah.
they're going to synchronize their big moments with those big moments. So finding out from their perspective what are the highlights as
Mm,
well. I guess a more boring side of the prep, but equally essential, is making sure you chat to the security people, making
yeah.
sure that they know that you respect them, but
Yeah.
equally that they know that you're meant to be there and that
Yeah.
you're there for the whole gig. Um, and
Not
then
not getting wrestled to the floor as you're getting the
yeah, oh,
shot.
yeah, exactly. It always happened. And then equally, obviously chatting to the band. Some
Yeah.
bands are very hands-on as regards creative stuff, the output, and some bands are less so. Or you might find there's one member of a band who's really keen and wants to
Yeah.
get interesting stuff. And figuring out whether you can push boundaries. Like it might be that the manager says, "Oh no, you're not allowed to set foot on the stage," but it might be that the band members say when the manager leaves the room, they might say, fuck it, come on, during the last song, get on stage and and get a shot from the back. So
Nice. Yeah.
so you have to pick your moments and
Yeah.
know when to bend and when to break and when to
And
step back.
when you're shooting stadium photography, do you carry two cameras, three cameras, one camera? Like, do you have different
Pretty,
lenses ready on each camera?
yeah, pretty much always two cameras. So, I mean, as regards for anyone who's into photography watching, I kind of always shoot fully manual, with the exception of sometimes using autofocus, but
Yeah.
always using auto white balance because it's a losing battle to try and set your white
Yeah.
balance during a gig.
Especially with the
It's just,
lighting.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. What's the point? And if I'm shooting raw, I can fix that in post
Yeah.
anyway. But shutter speeds, I try and keep, obviously it's dependent on the lens and try and keep quite fast in order to capture fast movement. But if it's a
Yeah.
slow artist who's like sitting on a stool playing a guitar,
Yeah.
you have more room for slower shutter speeds if you're in a low light venue. Camera
Amazing.
wise, pretty much always two. I might have like a 24 to 70 kind of general purpose lens on one camera and like maybe an 85 or a 50 mil on the other. If it's a really big venue, I'll use a 70 to 200 a lot of the time as well.
Nice.
And then on the other camera, flick between the 24 to 70 and the 85.
Okay.
You develop shoulder muscles of steel during this, which is great. So, like I think all my through my childhood, I was preparing myself for it because I was known as the one kid in school who kept every book of the entire week in his school bag at all times. People used to avoid, yeah, people used to avoid me coming down the corridors, like, don't get hit by that
Bash you with
bag.
it,
So,
yeah.
yeah. So it's, yeah, it feels like I had prep for that for a long time.
Amazing. Oh, that's crazy. Imagining like how you because you obviously change so quickly. Oh my God, a shot's coming. Get that up,
Yeah.
and then flipping it around and
Yeah, and then
you,
even changing lenses like can be tricky. Yeah, I mean you have
oh
to be able to use your camera without looking, and you have to be
yeah,
able to change lenses super quickly, but avoiding getting dust in it. So
yes,
it's a bit manic. I've never lost. The closest I came to losing a piece of equipment was at a gig with Elbow,
yeah.
and I left a 50 mm lens on the foot of the stage, and I was then up in the balcony, and then Guy Garvey he shouts from in between two songs later in the gig. He said, "Hey, Pete, wherever you are, I've got your lens," which is great. So,
That's your moment of fame. You've got it.
oh
You've
wait,
claimed it.
yeah, but I actually did have one other disaster I have to mention, and I
Go
mentioned
on.
this in another interview recently. Um, I was on the Isle of Wight with a band called Lawson, who have recently
Okay.
reformed, actually.
Yep.
Great band. And it was for the Isle of Wight Festival. And myself and Andy, the lead singer, had gone up the rock early in the morning. And we were walking up there, and a monkey out of nowhere
Of
jumps on
course.
my back.
Of
Yeah,
course.
of course. And ripped open my backpack and took
Yep.
out a 15 mm fisheye lens and threw it down the road. And Andy, and it's just rolling down the road. And then Andy, if anybody knows the band, he's like the tallest and longest leg and
Yeah.
lankiest guy you ever see. He just legged it after the lens, and thank God got it before it got to a corner because it would have been over the edge.
Yeah.
And the
Wow.
lens actually, believe it or not, survived. I had to bend back the metal hood.
Of
There
course.
was, yeah, and then I eventually sold the lens to a mate a couple of years ago. So there you go, win-win.
The funny thing is, the hood probably stopped the lens from getting damaged, right? Because it probably
Oh,
bounced
it
from
did.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my only lens I've ever had that had a metal hood and the
Oh,
built-in
how
one. Yeah,
lucky.
yeah. How lucky
That's
is that? The
nuts.
monkey. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I know you also do studio photography because I heard you shot this incredible choreographer lately. I don't know who that might be. And
Yeah, it's amazing.
and I believe from, the experience that you got a real taste for shooting dancers. Can you
Yeah,
explain
absolutely.
from your experience from both sides, what would you say are the major differences between studio and live and benefits and drawbacks and so on?
Yeah. Well, for me, before 3 weeks ago, before we did that shoot,
Yeah,
I would have said that there was very little correlation.
yeah,
I've done a certain amount of studio stuff, but I've
yeah.
mainly done live stuff, as you know. But I have done, like, for instance, Rick Astley's latest album cover, the
Which
best of
looks
me.
incredible, by the way.
Thank you, dude. We shot in the same studio where I shot
Oh,
you, by
yeah, I
the way.
remember you telling me. Yeah,
Yeah. So that was kind of my first kind of proper studio album cover,
yeah,
and I really enjoyed that. But again, as I said, I hadn't done a phenomenal amount of studio, and then I didn't see a big. I felt with kind of live gigs, there's a certain amount of prep, but there's a certain amount of kind of like living in the moment
yeah,
and watching
definitely.
for the whereas with studio photography in my head, it was all very much kind of completely planned, and I had just two different worlds in my head. One I was very comfortable in, and
Yeah,
one that I'm becoming more comfortable in, but
yeah.
wasn't sure. And then you came along,
That's
and
what I was gonna
then
say.
yeah, but it's great because it was actually now the first time that I felt that my live work relates to it. I'll tell you why. Working with a dancer, for a start, they know how to move, which means there isn't the kind of, it doesn't feel like, it feels more of a synergy
Yeah.
that the two of you are working to create something. And a dancer is all about form and movement,
Mm,
and as a result, working with someone that understands that and
yeah.
is willing to take risks automatically makes you more confident in your head,
I swear there
which
was one moment I nearly fell on my head. Do you remember
yeah,
when the
absolutely.
paper nearly shifted away and I was like, "What?"
Yes. Well, next time we'll make sure you do fall on it.
Yeah, yeah, of course. We'll
Yeah,
catch that.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But also, even there was a moment in that gig, not the gig. See, I called it a gig.
I know.
There was a moment in that shoot where I asked you just to play with form, and we were
Mm,
just trying the lights in different positions. And I found myself shooting you in the same way that I shoot at the gig, where sometimes
ah,
I'll be in the pit, I'll be in the pit, and I'll be shooting from unusual angles to
yeah.
work the lights into part of the composition with the
Okay.
artists, whether directly or whether about catching the way that the light falls
Mm,
in them. So at that same moment that you were playing with different forms and I was moving around, it suddenly felt it actually felt, oh my goodness, this is what I'm at home with. This is just
Yeah.
like being in a gig.
Yeah.
So for me, that's why it's got me excited about it. And like any music industry photographer, I'm nervous about the future of gigs.
Yes.
So I am delighted to have, stumbled upon with your help kind of a different avenue, which I feel that all I've done before channels into, rather than something more
Yeah.
parallel and separate, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Well, from my perspective, I've never been happy with a photo shoot before in my life. Like, don't get me wrong, the
Cheers.
photographers were great.
Yeah.
Every photographer I've worked with has been amazing. But I've never walked away and gone, oh my God, I'm actually really happy and I can't wait to post this stuff. So yeah, massive
Thanks, man.
compliment to you because
Appreciate it.
I've never, and I remember messaging you and going, right, this is a new image Brendon coming. I'm going for the hippie, new tattoos, all this stuff. I want a harder look kind of. And
Mm.
we did a great image board together, and then we spoke about it, and instantly we both knew on set, like, this is what we want to do, but at the same time we had no idea what we were doing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
In a,
exactly.
like, we
It
didn't know
was
what was
new
going
for
to come
both of
next.
us.
And
Yeah,
then
exactly.
we were like, yeah, 3 hours isn't enough. And then three
Yeah,
hours done, and we weren't even halfway through, and it was like, can we have more time?
yeah.
And I swear we could have kept shooting for hours and kept going
Oh,
and going and going.
100%.
It was a lot of
Absolutely.
fun, and I had so much energy because I was like, and again, show me that.
Yeah,
Yeah, get the light. My body looks
100%.
great. Yes.
And there's so much stuff we didn't get to try that hopefully the next time we can get to.
Yeah, we definitely need to
Yeah.
arrange another shoot soon. Just give me a week's warning so I can get back on the weights and start cutting the fat again. Because since then
Yeah.
I've eaten nothing but takeaway since that shoot.
Are
So
you
it's
serious? Oh, you were. We'd be like, you have to wait for the Photoshop, Brendan. Yeah,
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 yeah. So we
yeah,
might need to do more photoshopping on this one.
yeah. I
Oh,
think you'd
bless
be
you.
grand.
So let's sort of talk about the Idiot's Guide a little bit because obviously it'd be a waste to not get you to talk about the cameras and the equipment.
Yeah, yeah,
So for the dummies out there, and I don't mean that in a negative, I mean like how they have the books like Cameras for Dummies. Let's do a
yeah,
kind of a guide on that. Can you explain the camera settings and what they all mean? So from ISO to aperture stroke f-stop to shutter speed, picture styles. And I know with each one it has a
yeah,
benefit and a negative. So can you talk about them and sort of say
yeah.
what they
Well,
are?
yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. There's a single concept which is the most important. No one's ever asked me this in an interview, and it's great to
Ah,
actually. But there's a single concept, and it's kind of like a triangular concept for anyone who's like looking has a camera that they've never put into manual mode. And there's one single thing that if you can get the grasp of, it
mm,
opens up every other doorway. And so it's not like you have to learn loads of things. You
yeah,
learn one thing that enables you to make everything else much easier.
cool.
So it's basically you have three main things, which your ISO, your shutter speed, and your aperture, and they have a triangular relationship where if you imagine them as 3 points in the triangle, um, they all kind of have an effect on the other. So for instance, your ISO, which basically in layman's terms, it means how sensitive your camera is to light. Now, when it's really low,
Mm,
you'll have an image which it will require more light to get a bright, say, again in layman's terms, to have a bright, properly exposed image,
yeah,
but will have very little grain. So you
yeah,
know that stuff when you take a picture in a pub at night with your phone, it's really grainy.
yeah,
So that's because your camera is at a high ISO,
yeah,
so it's more sensitive because it's a low light environment,
yeah,
but it's more grain with it, and that's essentially because more electricity is being pumped into the sensor in the camera,
yeah,
and it causes like little bits of interference between the little dots on the sensor, and they creates that noise.
yeah,
So the ISO, that's one part of it. The shutter speed, that's essentially how long that the sensor gets exposed to the light. So really fast shutter speed, so it means it's just open like really quickly.
yeah,
That's good for capturing something without motion blur, like it could be a bird flapping its wings.
mm,
A really slow shutter speed, if you were to shoot the same thing, you're going to get blur, and so it won't be this frozen thing. It'll be just this wash of an image across the screen at
yeah.
the extremes. I guess I'm talking about here.
So I suppose like
Uh,
things like sports games and stuff, they always shoot at a high shutter speed because everyone's moving so
yes,
fast. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And the third part of that triangular relationship, and I'll explain why there's a relationship in a minute, is the aperture. The aperture is essentially in the lens. It's like basically there's a bit in the lens like a diaphragm which can open and close,
Yeah.
and that determines how much light is let in. The more open that diaphragm
Mm,
is, that aperture number is a lower number. So the lower number is really uh, a way to remember that, because that sounds counterintuitive,
Yeah.
is the aperture number is a measure of how closed it is, not how
Yeah.
open.
Yeah.
And that way, a low number makes sense as letting in a shitload of light.
Yeah.
Yeah, rather than, because it is a weird concept. But when it's really open like that, so the diaphragm's open,
Yeah.
you get what's called a very shallow depth of field. So if I was to take a picture of you now, the background would be blurred out,
Yeah.
but you're also letting in lots of light. Now that which is really nice.
Yes.
Now, equally, if you imagine that there was somebody behind you that I wanted to get in focus as well, and they were 2 meters behind you.
Mm.
Incidentally, there is someone behind you right now. No, but so,
Scary thing is, I looked on the
yeah.
screen and I went,
Oh, you did,
"Is
did you?
there?"
I love it. Yeah,
My
no,
balcony's
yeah,
open, so you never know.
yeah, you never know. But essentially, if that aperture is closed right down,
Yeah.
that gives you what's called a deep depth of field.
Mm.
So in other words, it's greatly in focus, but because it's closed, there's less light coming in.
Yeah.
Now, if you think about it now, if I'm in a gig and I'm in a situation where I have a slowly paced artist who sits still on a stool, strumming their guitar, not moving much,
Yeah.
but it's a really badly lit,
Yeah.
what I'll want to do is I'll probably want a wide aperture so that diaphragm is open, so it's a low number,
Yeah.
and the capabilities depend on the lens you're using or the camera, but so it might be down at what's called like 1.8,
Yeah.
and that's letting in lots of light. Now, because of lots of light coming in, it means that essentially I can use shutter speed wise, if I have enough light, I could use like a safe shutter speed like 1/160th for argument's sake,
Yeah.
so that I know with it on a say a 24 to 70 mil lens, so
Yeah.
I know that I haven't got motion blur on them. And the ISO, again, because of lots of light coming in
Yeah.
with the wide aperture, I might only need to go up to like what's referred to as like 640.
Yeah.
So there's not too much grain. Now, if the lights were even crapper,
Yeah.
I may have a choice here. So I already got my aperture really wide.
Yeah.
So I have a choice now. If I want to still get this properly exposed, but there's still not enough light with having that aperture really wide, I
Yeah.
can either decrease my shutter,
Yeah.
or in other words, leave it open for longer so that the sensor gets exposed for longer, and that gives me more light, but gives me motion blur.
Yeah.
Now, with a fast-paced artist jumping around, off the drum kit, that's not necessarily going to work, but for Ed Sheeran, it might.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so you know what I mean. But if it's a fast-paced artist, that's not really an option unless you want the motion blur
Mm.
for creative purposes. So all I'm left with there is upping the ISO.
Yeah.
So bringing that 640 that we had in the previous scenario maybe up to 1600,
Yeah.
but that's going to give me more grain.
Yes.
So you've essentially working with manual of the camera on manual is all about understanding that triangular relationship.
Yeah.
If you understand which one you should be thinking about when, so ISO, whether you're increasing it in order to allow yourself to take a picture in lower light,
Yeah.
or you're increasing it even further to allow yourself to use a faster shutter speed, or it could be the aperture you're making a big number or
Yeah.
quite close to diaphragm in the lens in order to get maybe two people who are two different distances from you in focus.
Yep.
It might be a press picture for a band, for argument's sake, and they
Yeah.
both have to be in focus. So as a result of that, if I don't have them well lit enough because
Yeah.
I've closed down the aperture in order to get them both in focus, I might have to again lower the shutter speed,
Yeah.
or and that might be fine for a press picture if they can hold still, if they're if it's
Yeah.
that could be very practical, or I might have to increase the ISO.
Yeah.
So yeah, understanding that triangular relationship is probably the key thing for anybody who's looking to get more into photography, because that is the gateway to making everything else make sense.
So I'm going to chuck a hard one at you. What if it's a
Yeah.
really low lit stage and the guys are running around as fast as he can? How do you deal with that?
And that does happen.
Of course it does.
Then you have to be. And weirdly, I was talking about this in an episode of my YouTube channel there the other day, that essentially what you have to do is you have to be prepared to increase that ISO value way higher than you might feel comfortable.
Yep.
So if they're running around really fast and if you want tight images without motion blur and there's bugger all light, but so you've opened up your aperture as far as
Yep.
possible. If you still need more light, you just have to increase the ISO.
Yeah.
Now, it used to be the case that I hated image noise. But the fact is, very often an image which looks really noisy on the screen when it's printed looks less so.
Yeah,
Or equally, when it's resized down from like being like a 60 megapixel beast
crushing them.
down
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
yeah, when you crush it, the averaging process that happens when you resize actually
Mm.
reduces a lot of the noise.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, there are different cameras to help in these scenarios as well. So one of my cameras is an A7S2, which is only like 12 megapixel, but it's
Yeah,
a beast with low light.
yeah.
And that's because the sensor, the little bits of, because it's only 12 megapixel, the little bits of electronics are slightly further away from each other in the sensor.
Ah, got it.
So the
Yeah,
interference that we talked about earlier doesn't manifest as much,
brilliant.
because being further away, they can't interfere as much,
Yeah,
so you get less noise. But yeah, so
amazing.
yeah, so there's always, it's all about understanding, I guess, which of the three um, is closest to meeting your client's needs, and then work from there.
Amazing. So sticking with the theme of the dummies guide too. Let's talk about lenses. So
Okay.
similar theme to we've just been speaking about is describe what lenses you use and when and the best ways to use them.
Yeah, sure. Well, like I was talking about earlier, with the kind of that one lens bringing to San Francisco that
Yeah,
time for that trip. I'm a big proponent of loving limitations, and that's one of the reasons why I love prime lenses, so having that single focal length, meaning that you have to be creative and work for the shot.
and
So
quickly explain what a prime lens is and a zoom lens, just because for
yeah,
the people that don't know.
so prime lens is a lens which essentially is a fixed focal length. That means when you look through it, you can't zoom in or you can't zoom out. Whatever you can see is what you can see unless you move yourself.
Yeah,
So that's basically what a prime lens. And a zoom lens is a lens that allows you to go wider or tighter in.
yeah,
Um, so when I have two cameras on me when I'm shooting a typical gig, I'll have maybe a 24 to 70, which basically is quite wide to fairly tight,
yeah,
essentially, lens on one camera. And on the other, I'll have maybe an 85 or a 50 or whatever, or maybe even sometimes a fisheye, which is like a
yeah.
12 mil or something like that.
Wow.
Um, so I tend to love as much as possible doing a lot of stuff with the prime lenses. I have to work more for those shots,
Yeah,
but in general, the optical quality is even better from those, and you get more interesting shots when you've had to work for the composition. But at the same time, the 24 to 70 is a great workhorse if you don't know exactly what's going to happen,
yes.
or for when or something unexpected happens and you quickly need to grab something. So it's not that it is possible, and obviously it goes without saying, it's possible to be creative with a lens like that. But I'm just meaning using prime lenses forces you to be creative. So when you do go back to a lens that offers you way more tools,
Yeah,
you use them more wisely.
yeah. And a lot of prime
Uh,
lenses tend to have a lot higher aperture as well, don't they? So
yeah, they let in a lot more light generally. So often a 24 to 70 will let the widest aperture. So remember the low number.
mm,
So that's in lots of light is 2.8.
yeah,
Whereas on kind of like an 85 mil or a 50 mil, you might be down to like 1.8 or 1.4 or 1.2. Essentially,
yeah.
in layman's terms, what that means is it lets in an absolute crap load of light.
Well,
And
I
also,
always want to,
yeah.
because I used to shoot with a Canon years and years ago before I
Hmm.
transferred over to Sony. And I always had my eye on the 50mm 1.2 lens, the L lens.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
was
yeah.
so like, it was £1,500 at the time. And I was like, can I justify it? Can I?
Yeah, I know, absolutely. I never went 1.2 on the Canon,
Mm,
and then I switched to Sony a couple of years ago. So I'm kind of my main lenses now are the 24 to 70. I have a 50 mil 1.2
yeah.
that's converted that I inherited from my grandfather, funnily enough.
Well,
Yeah, and I was stuck on a lens in a drawer on a camera for the last like 30 years, and then I got it
that's,
fixed recently,
yeah,
which is amazing. I got adapted for my cameras. I have an 85 mil 1.4, a 70 to 200, a 12 to 24 mil,
yeah.
which is great for like
Super
super
wide.
wide,
Yeah.
yeah, super wide stuff. And I have a few vintage Helios Russian lenses, which are amazing. And incidentally, if any of you like, if you go to charity shops, it's unbelievable how many of them have camera gear behind the counter. Old
Wow.
vintage, yeah, old vintage lenses. And for most vintage lenses, you can adapt them to most SLRs or mirrorless cameras
Mm,
with adapters off Amazon for about 14, 15 quid.
wow. Great advice.
So yeah, so it's I love doing that, and you get this kind of unique look that you don't get off these super clean, hyperly manufactured
Yeah.
lenses that we have now.
Yeah.
So something just really brings character to it.
So I suppose this is a question for me. What is a macro lens, and
So a
why does it work in the way it works?
so a macro lens is basically a lens that has been designed to allow you to focus on something very close to the lens,
Mm.
extremely close, but still but still have that object like really large in frame. So if you were all those pictures you might see are like a hyper close up of a coin or of a butterfly.
Yeah.
Now there are exceptions to that. There are regular lenses can be often converted to macro lenses by
Okay.
with these, yeah, with either with an adapter you stick on the end,
Yeah.
or with techniques like literally flipping a lens around the wrong way and using an adapter
Oh,
to attach
cool.
it to your camera.
Yeah.
So I've never done that never done that myself. But macro photography, it's something I would love to do more of. I had a macro lens for a while many years ago,
Mm.
and I really enjoyed kind of this is before I was in gigs or weddings.
Yeah.
I used to back when I lived in Wicklow in Ireland. I used to visit this local butterfly farm, and I have a whole load of like macro pictures of like
Amazing.
the heads of butterflies and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. It's definitely something I'd love to do more of, at some point.
And I noticed we were talking about this last time we met about your moon photography. And I remember saying to you, "Oh, I thought you just took that image off the internet." But actually
Yeah,
you've created a killer lens, haven't you, to take
yeah.
photography of the moon?
Well, it's you see what happened was during lockdown. First thing I did was contact Sony, and I said, "Can I borrow one of your ridiculous Formula One sports lenses? These
Yeah.
enormous beasts." So they sent me this 600 mil lens, or no,
Mm.
400 mil, but with an adapter to basically turn it into 600.
Yeah.
And stuck that on this tiny tripod and was taking pictures during lockdown of the moon.
Yeah.
And then now these lenses cost ludicrous money that I would be shot that I've even
Yeah.
dreamt about spending right now.
Yeah.
So when I inevitably gave that lens back after 2 months, I was like, I need some kind of like long lens fix.
Yeah.
I can't lose the moon, you know. So I'm gonna go and grab it. It's over there. You're gonna hear some rumbling and crashing, but let me go and get this.
Go, go,
One
go, go,
second.
go, go, go. So for the people on the podcast, just so you know, he's running off to get a lens. If you want to see what this lens is like, go on his Instagram, and I think there's a picture on there somewhere where he's been taking pictures of the moon. And again, if you're on the podcast, head over to the YouTube channel, and you will see on the video the lens he's about to show us, which is absolutely ridiculous. And hopefully, I will talk right up to the time he gets back. Look at that.
And here you are. There we go. It's almost like we planned it. So this is not a finished project. There are some old lenses, vintage lenses can get what's called kind of a mold in them, which
Yeah.
can be removed, but you need special tools. So I have here. This is one part of the
You're going to
project.
have to go backwards,
So
aren't you?
yeah, I'm gonna have to go back. So basically, this isn't even the whole thing. There's another part that isn't
Yeah.
attached. So this is an old Minolta 400 mil.
Yeah.
Aperture is 5.6. It's pretty good optically, and then this is basically a 3x adapter which magnifies by three
Yeah.
times. Now that brings it to about basically 1200 millimeter. Now that on its own is probably the thing that when I get it properly fixed that I'll use most.
Yeah.
Because if you start, although I do have other adapters,
Yeah.
these are all different 2x and 3x adapters stacked on top of each other. Using them all at the same time would be impractical because so little light. Because every adapter you add in is kind of reducing the amount of light that's getting to the camera. And also, once you go beyond a certain focal length, you actually kind of lose a lot of sharpness. So technically, if I was to put all these together, this, which they do clip together, in fact, hold on, let me just see if I can.
We're going to make it work.
It really sounds like I'm prepping some kind of gun.
It does,
really,
doesn't it?
it's not good. Right. So we're at the pan across.
Yeah. I feel like I'm watching an episode of Star Wars where the Millennium Falcon flies across the screen.
So with all these adapters and 3x and 2x adapters, technically this is kind of like a 20,000 millimeter lens.
Wow.
Which is completely. But if you were to look down it with an incredibly steady tripod, it would with that level of magnifiers used, it would really be kind of blurry and unusable.
Yeah.
So I'm aiming to settle for 1200 mil.
Just settle for those 1200 mil.
Yeah,
Yeah.
settle for 1200 once I get the mold removed from this bit.
Yeah.
But there's loads of little lens repair places in London which are
Yeah.
great for 50 quid and that'll be sorted.
Amazing.
So that's the
Sick.
plan.
I knew you'd go off on one about lenses. That's why I asked you.
Yeah, fair enough.
So,
Dead right.
so this is a really basic question actually. What do you think makes a good shot? And feel free to go into a rant about competition and everything.
I don't know. I, it's a really hard one in some ways. I think at the end of the day is not being feeling slave to rules. Like things like I hate the word rule of thirds for a start
Okay.
because they are, and that's not to say it's not useful because they
Mm.
can be useful as helping you find starting points with your photography,
Yeah.
but not to feel constrained by them. I mean, in this context of music, I think a good shot is a shot that allows someone to feel some of the energy like they were there.
Yeah.
And you want somebody who's been to the gig when they see it to remember some of the feeling that they had.
To create emotion.
Or
Yeah.
or so it might be an emotional moment. Like there's one, and I can't put images on screen now in this Instagram, but there's one particular image, in fact, that I will post on Instagram later because of this.
Yeah.
I took in New York with the script, and it was in Radio City Music Hall.
Mm.
And I was at the back of the stage, and Danny had his arms up, was singing out to the crowd, and someone in the front row just reached out and put their finger on his shoe, just touching his shoe, and it was just like their way of connecting.
Yeah.
And I saw it, and I was so lucky because they did it once, and I shot, shit, I missed it, but they did it again, and I got it.
Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah, and it's bizarre. I mean, you know what it actually reminded me of? It reminded me of that Bible. I know that old Bible story about the woman touching Jesus' cloak to try and get healed. It was like, it was like just someone reaching out to touch,
Yeah.
So, yeah. So for me, that was something I regarded as a good shot because it captured
Okay.
something that was about emotion, about power, and about
Yeah.
someone seeking connection in a way that they wouldn't normally be able to get it. So,
Wow.
I mean, obviously there are technical aspects of a good shot about, being getting a good exposure so your
Yeah.
highlights aren't blowing out and making sure that it's sharp. But at the end of the day, for me, a good shot is a shot that feels like a good shot,
Yeah.
and the quality of
Agreed.
regards whether it is too noisy or not is almost secondary.
Yeah.
It's not to say they don't matter, but those things matter to help accentuate
Yeah.
the primary thing, and not become the primary.
Amazing.
Is that?
Yeah, no, that's it. So there's a lot of performers that kind of follow my podcast, and because obviously this video is going to go on YouTube, it's going to go on a podcast, and it'll be on IGTV. So I'm going to spread you everywhere across the internet. There's a
No
lot
pressure.
of performers that watch it and go and watch my things. So I know that coming out of this kind of crazy time that's happening right now, good old Rona, is people are going to be looking to get new portfolios and get into new photos. How does a performer who knows nothing about photography spot the difference between a good and a bad photographer? I suppose you probably shouldn't answer that. Let me ask it in a different way.
Okay.
Tell us what you think. What's the best way to find a good photographer and know you're getting a good photographer? So for someone that, shall we say, knows nothing about photography? It's quite a hard question, actually.
Oh, that is a hard question. Yeah, it's definitely a hard one, but that's good. Put me in the spot. Yeah, let me think now. Well, there's more than one factor. It's not just, first of all, it's not just looking at their. Okay, well, there's two parts to this.
Okay.
Part of it is if you go and look at their samples of their work.
Yeah.
Now, if they may be, there's nothing wrong with the fact that they may be someone just starting out.
Yeah.
So if it's the case that you only see 12 or 15 pictures of the one person or the one act or whatever the case, what you tend to say, photographer, that's not necessarily an alarm bell, but it is something to be mindful of. So if you're looking specifically for someone with a lot of experience of different people, you need to look at their portfolio.
Yeah.
Equally, you should be looking at, for argument's sake, different types of artists want to know that you understand their music. So if I'm working with a very slow, topically speaking, I was very blessed to have worked with Ennio Morricone quite a bit and been out to Italy, to his home in
Okay.
Italy, and at rehearsals and also stuff in Ireland and the UK. Now, I had shot some stuff with, classical performers before, nothing major.
Yeah.
But when his management looked at that, that gave them some sense that yes, I could switch into that mode and
Yeah.
and
Okay.
switch off from the rock and roll mode.
Yeah.
So I think we look at your one thing you have to do is make sure the person understands you and understands what you want to be, and they're not going to try and make you look like,
Mm.
look like a punk rock star or whatever the case may be. If
Change
that's
the
not
image
you.
completely.
Yeah, absolutely. They have to be able to, pretend. It's not that they can't stretch the because that
Mm.
photographer's own creativity, which you're hiring them for, may
Yeah.
bring you to places that you haven't thought of,
Yeah.
and that's great. But at the same time, there has to be some kind of synergy and meeting
Mm.
point in the middle. So I would say talking to them, whatever the case, is definitely a
Yeah.
critical thing. Equally, when you do talk to them, and again, this is less of a technical thing, but you need to make sure. I mean, again, I know this applies for music, but really, I'm sure it applies behind the scenes in the dance world as
Mm.
well, and all kinds of performance art. Is that they have to play well with others.
Yes.
They have to, be a team player. They have to, when something doesn't go right, or someone's upset about something, or someone's in a bad mood, that
Yep.
they know how to deal with it. They know when to step back. They know when to put the lens cap on the camera. They know how to drop
Yep.
tools and help someone out who's having a hard time. To be a positive thing, and that, and not be a diva. I have met almost all the photographers I work with are amazing,
Yep.
but I've met one or two who arrive at a gig and think they're the be all and end all, and it's just like, it's just not the way. It's not the way to approach it.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is obviously you want quality of work, but you want to talk to them to make sure that they understand you,
Yeah.
and then through that, combined with having looked at their work, you feel that they have the technical skills and the creative skills to
Mm.
match their understanding of
Yeah.
who you are, combined with the practical things about being able to work well with others.
Yeah.
And that's a really wangled answer to your question, dude, but hopefully it
No, no, no.
touches on some
You
of it.
got there. You got there. You got there in the end. We're just about getting
Exactly.
there.
Yeah, and back and then with Bilbo Baggins. Yeah,
Yeah.
there we go.
So, Corona.
Mm.
Corona, Corona, Corona. Good old Rona. I already know, but very briefly, how has it affected you?
Um,
Being that you
it's
do
a lot.
concerts.
Yeah, it has had quite a big effect. Quite a big
Yeah.
effect. I mean, pretty much all my live gigs for this year
Mm.
are canned. The script that I was on tour with when it happened, their obviously tour is postponed to
Yeah.
next year. Rick Astley's tour, who I would have been working on with, is
Yes,
postponed.
Rick. I love Rick.
He's amazing, and his comeback and his last few years has been phenomenal.
Yeah.
Now, on that note, he himself and his manager have kind of been very much a blessing to me because
Mm.
I have also been doing other work with them
Yeah.
for quite a while now, working on some like video stuff with Rick. I directed a music video of his a
Yeah.
couple of years ago, but I've also been working on just a number of kind of projects connected to his music.
Yeah.
And obviously, those I've stepped more into those things during this lockdown time,
Yeah.
which has enabled me to, I guess, survive a lot more easily than I would have.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky to be able to say, and largely thanks to the projects that I'm involved in now with him, that I have a way through this crisis
Yeah.
for the moment, but I'm looking forward to when gigs come back to hopefully being back out there. I mean, I have so many friends who work in music who are so struggling, like whether
Yeah.
they
I can
be
imagine.
backline techs or lighting designers or guitar techs, just anyone and everyone, people who
Yeah.
do work at the sound desk, the in-ear monitors, just anything and everything. There's a whole ecosystem which is in turmoil, dude, and it's
Yeah. And
it's
and a
horror
lot
it's
of people
horrible.
share your opinion that it's going to be next
Yeah,
year, if not later, before
yeah,
things like mass concerts happen. And it's the same. We're having the problem with the theatres as well. Although they're looking to open sooner, a lot of people are kind of saying it's unlikely that this year, because how can you social distance at a theatre and afford to keep it open?
yeah.
It's, you
It's
know,
just. No,
You
I,
can't operate at 30%, 20% capacity and make money
no,
in that world.
no. The tickets would have to become completely unaffordable in a time
Yeah,
when people have less money.
yeah, and they're
So
expensive
yeah,
already.
yeah. It's bizarre. It's kind of this whole crisis has shown the weaknesses of the nature of how capitalism
Yeah.
is structured,
Yes.
and yeah, I mean, and down the line in some utopia, I kind of wonder if some kind of hybrid between the values of capitalism and communism, where it meets in the middle, in some probably unsustainable utopia, is necessary. But I, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
I do believe there's a social floor that no one should fall through,
No.
and and no matter what, everybody has a responsibility to those who can't help themselves, whether that's their own fault or not.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we'll be judged by how we behave towards those who the most need. So
Exactly. Exactly.
whether they're the cause of their own need or not.
Yeah, well, you know me. I'm all about how much can I help.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
absolutely.
literally been my motto since the lockdown is
Yeah.
how can I help? How can I help
Well,
you?
you've been a phenomenal help to me recently. I tell you that, man.
Well, actually, I was just about to get onto that. Is obviously, we met up, and to be honest, you only had time, and I only had time to do that because of the lockdown, which I
Yeah.
suppose is one out of many positives we can take from everything happening. Like, don't get me wrong, everything's happening in the world is absolutely devastating, and obviously a lot of people losing their life, and that's super sad. But I believe many businesses, many amazing things are going to be created from this lockdown, and I think people are just going to get more and more intuitive and more creative to bring
Yeah.
everything back. We've got 2 minutes left. I didn't even
Oh,
realize the
really?
time. Yeah,
Oh,
it's
my
just gone out of
word.
time.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you a quick plug in the last 2 minutes. Is obviously we worked together, and you found this love for working with dancers, which you can closely relate to what you've done with your live
Yeah,
concert work.
absolutely.
Now, tell me if I'm too far in saying this, because you want to build up your portfolio of working with dancers, that you're willing to offer something right now.
Yeah, 100%. Basically, I'm doing kind of like kind of like a half price deal, where I'm doing like a 4 hour session, for basically for like around the kind of like two to 300,
Yeah,
and where you get like 8 fully edited shots,
yep,
and out of that 4 hour session, and
yeah,
obviously you get to go through them all and pick which ones you want worked on, and then we go
yeah,
back and forth between. And it basically, yeah, I'm offering that for the moment, for the next little while, basically for anyone who's connected with Brendon. So that applies to anyone watching here.
yeah. So, guys, if you
So
are watching,
yeah,
go to Shoot the Sound on Instagram, send a message saying I'm interested in the photo shoot. I watched you on BH Live, or I know Brendon. Even if you don't know me, just lie.
yeah,
just
exactly.
lie, get a discount.
I'm not gonna. There'll be no quiz. There'll be no
There'll be
quiz.
no quiz. We'll
Yeah,
bounce messages between each other. But if you send
yeah,
it through, I would say 100% do it. Why Peter is still quiet before he gets back into his crazy lifestyle, which was happening before lockdown. I know I'm going to be taking advantage of a second shoot that we got to go outside and do like
Mhm.
a crazy one running around London or something. So if people want to get hold of you, they can go to shootthesound.com. They can go
Yeah,
to Shoot the Sound on all your social media. Is
that's
that
right.
you've
And
got
YouTube,
and
new
YouTube. Oh,
YouTube
yes.
channel.
Lastly, go and watch Peter's new YouTube videos. They're amazing, especially with working with photography and cameras and so on. Anything I missed, you got five
Thank you,
seconds.
dude. Anthony, oh, have I got 5 seconds? Keep safe, everyone, and thank you for actually listening to me ramble for this long.
Do you know what? This is the most fun. I'll see you later, guys.
Take care.
Bye.